And good evening. Hope you're all fabulous. Welcome to our weekly weather waffle. And away we go. What a bit of a mixed weekend, but at least it didn't rain, I guess. At least people could get outside. At least it wasn't as cold as it has been last week. It was a bit chilly, especially when that sun started dipping towards the west. You could really feel that chill settle inside. And yes, out come the throw down, the throw ons, the blankies, the hoodies, the slippies, the gowns, whatever you got that keeps you warm at home. All right, let's get into what is coming up, what we've had, what we're seeing, what we've been, and away we go. All right, let's have a quick look at the past week in weather. But first of all, we'll quickly turn to the satellite picture as we normally do, and we can see, generally speaking, as the sun comes and goes, as the last 24 hours, because it's winter, of course, we can see that low, complex low, and trough sitting off the southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales coasts. You can see there it's actually split up into a couple of little centres. So there's a surface circulation almost off central Queensland now, and you can see that beautiful little pinhole circulation, and it very clearly shows that actually is a pretty close to like a warm chord low, but really no instability at the surface, because this time of year you can see there's a bit of cumulus, not much happening. But then you can see the upper part of that system, which is the stronger part of the system, and you can see storms firing on its eastern side, of course, where the moisture is best, and also where the convergence is best with the cooler air from the south. And that is primarily an upper driven system. You can tell by the obviously type of convection, and also where the circulation is happening. And you can see the surface is tilted to the west, whereas the upper system is sort of tilted to that sort of southeast. And generally speaking, that's been driving the weather across most of eastern Australia for the past week, including us, until it sort of weakened a bit and shifted a bit further north. You can see that circulation as it's shifted slightly north. That allowed that sort of convergence band between the ridge to the south, with a high that was near Tasmania for many days, and now sort of parked more close to New Zealand. It allowed that convergence band between its circulation, which is sort of winding around here, and the low, which is winding around here, and they were just colliding basically across between the Hunter and the Illawarra and us. And that just gave enough impetus, enough oomph to give us some showers. Not much else, unfortunately. And that sort of dealt with our week. I guess that's what's sort of been happening. To the west, you can see a really decent long wave trough, and you can see that's a long wave trough because the back end of it extends way over into the Indian Ocean. It's not overly strong, though. We can see here there's a bit of moisture with it, but it's mainly all high cloud and sort of bark, and not much bite with it. There is some decent cold air over southwest WA, which is not unusual for this time of year. And again, my rule of thumb: busy for them, quiet for us, and it's pretty much accurate what's happening at the moment. And of course, the north is pretty dead this time of year, with the monsoon trough well into the northern hemisphere, and they have this cell shifted north, so they're now sort of under that stable southeasterly trade winds, pretty kicking a little bit southeast. We can see here a Gulf line or two moving across here, which is those southeasterlies as they sort of tend more easterly as they cross Cape York, and they get sort of caught up on the friction of Cape York, and they then tend to kick and head more to the west as an easterly, and they do pick up a little bit of moisture as they cross the Gulf of Carpentaria, and they do tend to bring some showers to sort of northeast NT and around the Gove/Nhulunbuy area there, and often maybe overnight in the Darwin area if they do drag enough moisture across. But of course, there's not much with that at this stage. And of course, northwest WA, dead quiet this time of year, not unusual, dry as a bone. And the Indian Ocean off to its northwest, also pretty quiet, which is pretty indicative of really just a neutral IOD state at the moment. We'll look at the climate drivers coming up, and that's pretty much what's happening in the satellite picture there. We can see a very deep polar low, but it's well to the south at this stage, and it's being displaced. And that's pretty, again, looking at the SAM in a minute. We did have sort of that dip into the negative, and then we sort of looking at this sat pic at the moment, you'd think the SAM's pretty pushing back towards the positive, but I guess we'll look at the forecast and see what the forecast say. It may stay negative, just we're being a bit disadvantaged at the moment. Alrighty, let's hop into the week that was and see what's happening, and we'll quickly say hello to chat. G'day, chat, everybody. Hello, Mr. Well. Thank you so much again for looking after the chat. G'day, Rachel, Mr. Sharp. Hope you're both well. Um, yes, and Naz1967. Hello, and lovely to see you too. Great to see you. Yeah, that thing off North Queensland, well, Central Queensland is interesting. Mr. Well, it's definitely sort of indicative. Well, it's not very sort of indicative of it. A very strong El Nino developing, but very indicative of the sand being very active and really an absence of anything else at the moment. All right, let's have a look at today quickly. Actually, I'll make that a bit bigger for the eyes, make it a bit easier on the oldie eyes. Yeah, pretty much pop out as forecast today. Terry Hills again being the minimum 17 and the top being 20, which is what the forecast, well, we said 17 to 19 because I think Air Fry Hill sort of pushed a little bit up. We can see Camden 20.2, very nice. A bit of extra sun out that way. Pretty much cloud hang around the coast for most of the day. There was some flashes of sun, and you can see Obbs Hill is definitely some UHI. There's some urban heating because you look at the rest of the coast, very much 18s and 19s. In fact, Airport, which is pretty much a good indicator of under this airstream, only 18 struggled. And it was quite cool on the coast. As I said, the cloud did hang around with some nice breaks, but it wasn't as much as promised. But the West did get those sunny periods better, which is good on them. So, yeah, 20.5 at Obbs Hill is just a joke, and no doubt it'll be used as oh my god, but really 20.2, and at Camden 20.1 and Horsley and 20 at Richmond are very indicative of the more sun out that way, and also the differences in the air mass, the colder air obviously staying off the coast as the ridge sort of tries to muscle in, which is still having a hard time, and that cool air over the Tasman still hanging around. And you can see light winds didn't help mix it as well. So, that cool air in the surface got to stay pretty much intact. Nothing really kicked it out or pushed it out of the way. And then it was just reinforced by that cloud coming through and not allowing much warmth to come down from the sun at all on the coast. And the west benefit from the clearer skies. So, nice tonight. It looks like pretty a repeat last night. Although there should be a bit more clearer skies. There is a bit more dry around, and that's maritime influence because of that light Wednesday. Isn't going to drive as much. Although you notice there is southeast to a tad east southeast, which does mean that it's a bit more of that moisture has pushed a little bit inland. You can see that reflected in the dew points there, which is for the first time in a few days is again up into sort of low teens, I guess. Is that low teens when you go above 10? I'm not sure. You sort of low tens. But yeah, and high sort of single digits, which is enough to sort of maybe make a bit of cloud hang around, especially with that inversion above us. What it does, it traps that moisture at the surface, of course, makes it a bit more like a pressure cooker. It doesn't allow the air to mix, so that dry air doesn't get a chance to come down and mix out that moisture and give us those nice, clear, fine nights that we want, crispy ones. So I'm saying, yeah, it looks definitely like it's going to be more partly cloudy. I think the west, again, will do a bit better. They'll see a little bit more dry air mixed down, and that'll be thankfully helpful from the downslope sort of winds from the Blue Mountains as well, sort of a bit of that dry air seeping down, especially if there's not a lot of wind around, so they'll just naturally fall, subside down the mountains and subside and mix out, whereas the coast will still stay very much under the influence of that maritime air off the coast. But let's hope that something sort of breaks that. There is a forecast, a bit of a southwesterly to develop overnight, just a light one, but hopefully that's enough to sort of push a bit of drier air in through, mix some of that moisture out and allow sort of skies to clear a bit. But we'll see. All right, let's have a look at the week that was. I'll make this a bit bigger for the eyes, and we can see here the week that was. Temperatures, again, the average, which is the minimum, and the maximum, still pretty much around, still a bit chilly, still running a little bit below for July. And you can see there's obviously the max temperatures a bit warmer the last few days. Min temperatures sort of even out a bit as well, although it's still been quite cool. So nice. But it's been nice. You can see the rainfall. We'll look at that in depth again. Pretty much confined to the coast, which is not unsurprising. A bit of orographic effect in the Blue Mountains as well, with that onshore flow there for a few days, helped it to pick up a few mils. But generally speaking, it's just been pretty quiet week weather rainfall wise. Once you get past that sort of Hornsby through to Liverpool, sort of Campbelltown, sort of demarcation line again. A few sort of isolated falls picked up, but not much. We'll look at the climate stuff coming up soon, but we can see obviously we know about the El Nino and the much hype about that. And then we'll look at, again, the end of winter and spring and summer rainfall outlooks as well, what CFS has got. Of course, it's mid-month, so we don't have a lot of fresh model data. We only have the CFS updated, but we will pop to that very shortly. All right, let's have a look at the 7-day accumulated radar rainfall. This is obviously not from the stations. This is actually from the radar itself. We can see, of course, roll out the line, which is just the interference from the Terry Hills Doppler radar itself. But again, as I said, very much confined to the coast. Some decent falls there along the coast in that southerly to southeasterly flow at that stage. Although the good thing about this is we can see that 15 to sort of 25 mil falls did penetrate into that Hornsview sort of Campbelltown region as well, which is great. Whereas a few weeks ago we didn't see that as much. So there's some good rains, but anywhere east of that did pretty well actually, let's be honest, in the last 7 days, given it's July. And July is one of our driest months of the year, and we're coming into that dry period between July through to sort of September, October. Pretty dry all round. And we those normally get those horrid nor'westerlies or westerlies kicking up. No sign of them at this stage, which is good. But some good falls too. You can see there along the coast. There's plenty of 40 to 60 mil falls, and as you go slip a bit further north, they had that sort of persistent southerly stream there up near the Hunter there for a while. But no, I think everybody will happily take that sort of falls if you're on the coast. And probably 50% of that fell one night, but beggars can't be choosers, can we? But generally speaking, that's pretty good. And unusually so, it's been pretty quiet here once you get past the northeast or the escarpment of the Illawarra as well. Pretty dry, in fact, at all. Not much at all. Only between 2 and sort of 5 mils, maybe up to 7.5 mils for the whole week, which is quite dry. And so that's unfortunately the Mayor and the southwest there, and of course Campbelltown and to the south there as well, sort of missed. And that's again another sort of rain show effect as well, as a consequence of the Royal National Park and the that northeasterly Illawarra escarpment as it hooks around to the northeast, does stop a lot of that moisture penetrating in and being able to be used. So they're being a bit dry, but the rest of it not too bad, I guess. Generally widespread sort of 7.5 to 20 mils falls, which again, no one will sneeze at. All right, that's not bad at all. All right, let's hop into. We're going to look at the setup for the climate at this stage, and this is the latest from the NOAA briefing on ENSO. Obviously, they're still going with that moderate to strong El Nino developing, and a lot of the southern places like the Bureau, for example, have already said it's developed, and NOAA, they require a bit of a longer time frame before they classify it, but they've basically said that they think it's about to develop, or obviously in the process of developing. We can all know that's no secret or surprises there. What is a surprise though is the recent trend, especially in the CFS models, about this peak now only about 2, which obviously just scrapes into the strong. And I'm not discounting that this is going to be possibly a strong El Nino. Again, putting a big asterisk next to it, strong does not necessarily equal effect either. It's just a label because of the values that each ENSO event has its own wave impacting it. And also, as I've said many times, and that the first event or the first switch or transition into like a different setup, whether La Nina or El Nino, that first event always tends to be messy anyway, because you've got lag events from the previous event. There's a whole lot of stuff about going in the background about what the setup is, whether to other drivers, what MJOs are active, what the upper atmosphere is doing, whether there's any sort of stratospheric warming events going on in both the Arctic or Antarctic, a whole lot of stuff that contribute to this. So the initial one, that switchover, tends to be messy, and this is going to be no difference on this occasion. There's not going to be sort of a uniform, consistent, impact of this El Nino. It'll have local events will definitely contribute to that, and local drivers, and also other climate drivers will definitely contribute to that, especially for us, given that we have 3 sort of climate drivers that tend to drive our climate, and at different times of the year as well. But again, going back to it, there's no doubt there's an El Nino developing, the strength of which we'll find out, I guess, in the time. But this is the interesting switch or shift so far that I've seen, and will be interesting to see what the Weather Centre, the European Weather Centre, says about this on the 1st of August when their new updates come out. It'd be very interesting to see exactly where their models are going in terms of this, but you can see here very clearly they have this event peaking in sort of late spring, which again is an unusual for ENSO events. Normally they peak in late summer and they tend to then rapidly sort of weaken as they head into autumn. But this one is going to peak again in mid to late spring. And then you can see by the time summer starts, it's well into weakening, which of course then brings a whole range of other stuff into play because, initially, as I said, these ENSO events tend to get strongest and they sort of peak in around that sort of early to midsummer, which of course has significant impacts upon the monsoon. And of course, that monsoon is available moisture and about a whole range of things that the monsoon brings to Australia. Now, this one here tends to indicate that there's still a chance that there may be a decent monsoon, although albeit late, of course. We'll see how much the transition goes. But there's definitely, with a pretty rapidly declining and weakening El Nino into, in fact, that's already into just warm neutral by sort of early summer, even in the start of January. That's going to have a significant consequence about exactly what happens in terms of us for summer, what rolls out. And so this, which is what I've been cautioning for weeks and weeks, this premature speculation about the impacts of El Nino across a whole range of things throughout the Australian summer could easily cause a lot of egg to form on certain organisations and weather pages' faces, which is always why it's best to sort of have a look a few weeks ahead for sure, but always put a big asterisk next to it and catch what advice or what forecast you made, because these things, especially this is again a repeat, especially the first event in a sequence, or even if it's going to be an isolated one, it doesn't tend to roll out exactly what we've seen historically. There's always some sort of trick or some sort of background driver. Something's going on that that's complicating, contributing to, and of course, nothing in nature ever rolls out exactly how we expect it or it's modeled anyway. There's complications, and we've seen just even locally just how the local models have just handled the last few weeks rather poorly and been all over the place. So Enzo is going to be no different, let's say here, but we can see even on the SSTs, this is the sea surface temperature anomalies, mind you. This is not the what they're going to be recorded, but the anomalies, and of course the dark is warmer and the dark browns are warmer and dark blues are cooler. Of course, you can see it. The classic sort of tongue situation here, very much classic. Like, okay, there's none, but you can see again, as CFS shown, it's weakening quite rapidly with the strongest anomalies pulling back towards, which is almost that El Nino Mordecai type situation, which is where it's more in that sort of central to early ENSO zones in like Nino 1, 2, maybe 3, as opposed to Nino 3.4 or 4. So when I talk about Nino 1, 2, 3, 4, Nino 1 is sort of over here, which is closer to sort of the American and South American coast. And you sort of go 2 and you go 3 and you got 3.4, which is where really the area that sort of affects us. And you got 4, which is the sort of very end zone, which does sort of affect us as well, but tends to affect more Central Australia, sort of WA. So basically, you can take each of these zones and sort of apply it to different aspects of the southern hemisphere as you go. And of course, down to 1, you're sort of looking basically over in the sort of far eastern Pacific. And you can see those brown core anomalies really retreat and pull back and erode very quickly. And you can see the interesting part here, and 3.4 is really what sort of drives our summer rainfall stuff, especially across the eastern coast. And across that northeast coast, the tropical areas, Coral Sea, which is where a lot of the moisture does get sort of sucked down into systems that go across the country and gets tapped into. You can see how the 3.4 peaks into, as I said, in that spring, and you can see those anomalies pull back pretty quickly east thereafter. So, interesting times ahead, and I guess we'll see which model when we're looking at sort of, I guess, pretty December and January. We'll be locked into exactly how this is going to play out, but pretty even November. We'll see which model wins. And we'll see if Copernicus, which is obviously the European conglomerate of climate models, have egg on their face or they emerge victorious. And the lone old CFS2 And to a lesser extent, JMA, which is Japanese too, I noticed have had a bit of a tweak in their outlooks and specifically, I'll show you one in relation to the Indian Ocean. Of course, that can have some downstream effects into the Pacific as well, because everybody tends to think about these events are all separate, disparate type events, but they're all interconnected by a whole range of things. Not only through the thermohaline, which is obviously the temperature and the currents of the ocean. Of course, then you've got these upper air things like the Rossby waves, and there's upper Rossby waves, and the MGO pulses as well that go across. They all interconnect, and then of course you've also got the flow through the Indonesian flow through, where water from Pacific does get into the Indian Ocean as well, and they tends to be reversed in El Ninos or in La Ninas, and all those sort of teleconnections as well that go across. So everything's interconnected in some way, and the old butterfly flaps its wings over it there, has an impact upon there. Is very much also the case for the climate system, as it is the framework, the engine, whatever you want to call it. And of course, thrown into that, you've got potential of a sudden stratospheric warming event, which can disturb airs, push out the polar vortex and wobble it around. Of course, that can also have dramatic impacts upon just exactly the climate engines and how they play out. So it's all open slather at this stage, and this definitely indicates to me that there's something at play at this stage that's going to be impacting upon just about how the ENSO rolls out. And I'll be looking forward to seeing that. Now, I talked before about the IOD, and of course, we've all seen the Bureau's recent outlook. If you haven't seen the Bureau's recent outlook, they're going for, again, a positive IOD to develop, which of course means drier weather. But the JMA, which is the Japanese Meteorological Agency, they do quite a lot of work for the Indian, because obviously there's impacts for them in terms of not only the monsoon and the cross equatorial and cross the hemisphere upper winds that tend to play and feed into some of their climate systems as well. They're going for a completely opposite take to our Bureau, which is no shock to anybody. But you can see the Bureau is running with a drier positive ID, and JMA are going actually for it to dip into the wetter towards the sort of mid-spring. Now, that could be interesting as well, because that could be one of the things that's definitely impacting upon ENSO in what CFS is picking up. So there's a whole lot of stuff, as I said, drivers. So watch the space. They're going for it to stay neutral, which is probably great for us at this stage, because it means even though the inland west of the Great Dividing Range are going to get those sort of surges of moisture, which is an issue for them, for us per se, we're not going to get those northwest cloud bands, which do bring down quite a negative influences for east of the Great Dividing Range, because obviously the rain shower effects and the downstream effects, and they're going to be obviously reduced if there's going to be none of these sort of events happening. So it allows a bit more of this penetration of these easterly events, which we've seen quite recently with all the there's onshore winds and the ridges picking up this moisture and bringing showers, and they're sort of been also sitting quite stable and still for quite a few days in a row, which is again unusual as well. So it may not be as dry as we think it's going to be, but I guess we'll find out. But I do feel for anything west of the ranges, because they really do need that inflow from the IOD, and with it being quite negative until at least sort of mid-spring, you got October. That's not necessarily the best sign for anything west of that, where they start to look at the spring growing season, of course, bits and pieces like that. So let's hope that some moisture does penetrate, and that's also could be a reflection of what's going on in the Indian Ocean too, a few Rossby waves, or lack of Rossby waves, or lack of those long wave troughs that we love to see, especially in winter when they pick up the moisture and they drag it right across thousands of kilometers and interact with the Tasman and give great rain bands and a whole lot of stuff that's very beneficial. Doesn't look like they're going to see a lot of that. So again, that's a bit of a negative Nelly for the west of the ranges. All right, let's go look into the SAM, which is the Americans know as the Antarctic something oscillation, or something, the AAO. We call it the SAM, which is southern annular mode. Essentially the same things, which is really basically a measurement of the polar vortex and its displacement. And of course, its displacement means either cold air is pushed further north, or it's sucked further back towards the Antarctic continent, which means that you get these sort of milder air pushed down. And of course, with the Hadley cells the way they are at this stage, there's not a lot of tropical moisture around. you get these milder sort of outbreaks of stable weather, which we can see from time to time, where it's beautiful blue skies and dry, and you think this is supposed to be winter, for example. And the SAM is one of the key players in those drivers. And we can see here, and the SAM is incredibly difficult to forecast. In fact, it's probably actually one of these short to medium term drivers as opposed to the IOD and ENSO, which are more sort of medium to longer term drivers, which means they take a bit longer to wind up and they take a bit longer to wind down. Whereas the SAM is, very much wham bam, thank you, ma'am, and can change on the head of a pin, so to speak. One day it can be raging sort of negative and lots of fronts, and the next day it can be raging positive and just not much happening at all. So that's where things are at with that. You can see it's been quite volatile, although pretty much from sort of mid-June right through to even recently, it's been pretty much in the positive territory. Um, which has really allowed these sort of easterly events to happen. Or was it the other way around? Anyway, don't worry, my brain I'll pick it up in a sec. But again, seeing it's actually swinging negative, which I did mention in a few days ago in the rain outlook that it's actually going to turn negative, which, if I recall, does is it because this is where SAM gets a bit complicated because if for each actually season, the SAM has different impacts. So in winter, if it's deep winter, negative I think equals more easterly events, positive equals more fronts, which means dry. Of course, obviously east of the ranges because the fronts means they're westerlies and westerlies dry out, of course. And then in reverse of that is negative. The fronts retreat back down south, which is crappy for the snowies and etc. in Tassie, of course, and mostly most of southern Australia. But for us, because those westerlies are displaced further south, it allows more of an easterly flow or infeed. You get these ridges feeding up the moisture from the Tasman, and of course the Tasman, it's cool this time of year. The air doesn't carry as much moisture, which is where you get these sort of weak showers. You don't get a real lot of moisture in the vertical air column, and so the showers are sort of capped, as much as they're limited as much as they can drop, which we've seen even just the last few days. We get that sort of cotton blanket, sort of cottony wool blankety type, doona type effect, which is shallow. The showers are quite shallow and limited. So looking at that, you think there's going to be still quite a few sort of easterly events coming for us, even into the start of August. When it dips, it starts to go back towards positive again. So I guess we'll see. And at this stage, we've seen quite a few easterly events. The southeasterlies we've seen persistent now for a few days. Again, bring showers, but nothing really, massively in terms of falls because, again, as I said, the vertical air column where the higher the moisture gets in the air, the better, the thicker the showers are, the more that obviously the raindrops get to coalesce and then they fall to the ground, which means the bigger the raindrops are, the more rain that falls, of course. But these shallow or these thinner clouds don't drop as much rain, of course, because the raindrops aren't very big. They don't get to form very much. And so they're just these annoying sort of stream showers that we see. And they tend sometimes they can get a little bit thicker when you have like a bit of a coastal trough form where there's a bit of an upper system passes across the top. It's like there's upper cold air, which allows a bit more moisture in the vertical air column to sort of rise a bit further, make the showers a bit fatter. And then we get those, bit heavier falls. You get some of those moderate falls and better totals like we saw briefly this week. So looking at that, you'd say partly cloudy conditions, drizzly showers maybe every now and then, like the passing sort of southerly that doesn't do much, and pretty not good news so much for the snow fields. But they should start to recover by the end of the month. You can see here they actually did recover for a period of time there. They got some decent fronts through, which is great to see. But I did say back in, I think it was March, I think it was even April, I said that the ski season this year would be pretty poor. In terms of what we're looking at so far. And the poor buggers have had not a good season, but you take the good with the bad. We don't really have a true alpine region here in Australia, as we all know, and we have limited moisture because even though we're surrounded by seas, we do have massive. Was it the world's second largest desert stuck right in the middle of us, which is a very disincentive for any moisture sort of come our way. Alrighty, we're going to look at now what the next few weeks bring in terms of rainfall. We'll look at CFS, and CFS has sort of taken a turn for the dry, which is not an unusual turn of events, and that's sort of in the face of what the SAM's saying. So this is again where you start to look at local drivers sort of taking more of a role than the widespread drivers, and so this is interesting in terms of because we just saw that the Sam's going to stay sort of in a sort of more positive favor for us. But again, if you've got these generally the sort of broader features of being sort of drier working against you, then there may not be much moisture for these others to pick up. I guess we'll find out. But this is CSVS look at events. So you can see this week it's 18th of July to 25th of July, so the week coming ahead, and you can see it's going for a bit drier, which is we flagged anyway. There's definitely a ridge trying to push in, and it's been reasonably moist in terms of in the last few weeks or so. So we're expecting sort of a bit of a rebound. So it was not surprising that it's going to be dry this week. All right, let's have a look at next week. We can see the moisture starts to return. We can see again that on sort of shore stuff, you can see that white pushing on shore, which is basically average. You can see the dry stuff again displaced to the sort of south, and that's very indicative of that negative SAM developing, which is what we just talked about, very much so. And you can see that's reflected in Queensland here because you've got that onshore winds bringing moisture to basically nearly all the Queensland coast, which is good, in northeast New South Wales, which is pretty indicative again of some sort of Tasman low, north southern sort of coral sea, northern Tasman sort of stuff, or a trough even just sitting off there and sort of pumping onshore flows. Nothing ECL about that at all, and nothing sort of even interesting weather-wise about that at all, unfortunately. But average is average, and we'll take that any day other than drier. Then heading in towards the end of July and the start of August, we can see basically just sort of average, maybe a little bit drier. And I think that's definitely starting to indicate possibly sort of some sort of event coming in for Northwest. It's sort of a long way of trough, but a weak one at that, because you can see basically most of Australia here is average. But don't forget, this time of year it's incredibly dry anyway, so even it's probably just a weak system moving through. Southwest WA going negative, which again, of course, is interesting because we're sort of not necessarily going excitingly above average, but it's still something happening here, and you can see the effects. And I think that looks pretty much about the SAM turning probably a little bit neutral, I'd say, because there's no positive drivers here, because you can see no sort of positive anomalies across the south here, and really sort of nothing on shore here. So it looks a bit like it'll just toss a coin and work out what it's going to do. We can see again, obviously, the ENSO anomalies, pretty negative anomalies up there through the PNG tropics. Not unsurprising given what's going on up there. And then heading into sort of into early to mid-August, some interesting sort of positive anomalies here. And that's when we sort of see like little blobs like that. We'd love to keep an eye on that. And of course, you can see Southwest WAs with negative anomalies, which is definitely indicative of something sort of picking up for us. So, but still no major drivers there, but also nothing like majorly dry either. So pretty much average, which says to me there's probably going to be a few fronts come through. Not as strong as Southwest WA normally used to, but definitely something there. Maybe a weak, sort of a neutral SAM moving towards a positive SAM potentially. We can see most of the stuff is off the coast, not going onto the coast, which is again another indicator. Moving now into mid, sort of late August. Again, no real key drivers. A bit drier on the east coast, and possibly, as I said, that's maybe a SAM moving into positive again. You can see really nothing here that would say that's positive, and there's nothing to say it's obviously negative either. It's sort of just choose your own adventure type of stuff at this stage. But most of the country is staying still average, which means that to me there's still some trough activity coming in from the Indian Ocean across the centre there. And it's just there's not enough moisture to keep it going through over to us, which is pretty why you can see just some negative anomalies here, but generally consistent average anomalies there. And heading now into the end of winter, and we can see those dry anomalies picking up across most of eastern New South Wales. And starting to get some just average stuff here across southern New South Wales, southern Australia, which is pretty indicative of that switch to maybe a positive SAM, and even some IOD impacts. You can see here the negative impacts of ENSO are still well up in the tropics and well offshore Queensland, so that's something thankful. All right. So seasonal outlook. Again, this is basically based on all the models, not just CFS. So we can remember that they were basically saying that summer was going to be drier than normal. Spring maybe had some chances to be a bit above wet. Don't forget this summer was going to be still plenty of severe storms, but just those rain events. This is based upon all the models, don't forget. So we will get an updated version of this once the 1st of August rolls over. But again, no surprises that we're seeing, warmer. But end of winter, still, for most of Australia, it's slightly warm, but you can see cooler than, for us. So keeping an eye on that in terms of that. All right, let's have a look at now what CFS is saying for August itself. You can see average to just a little bit above average for the coast, but that's sort of dry air, and I think dry, and that's definitely indicative or reflective of just those lack of northwest cloud bands coming through. So August is definitely a time where you would see some of that activity because of that jet stream activity picks up, and this is where we normally also get to see those horrendous westerlies. And this is indicating that we may see some of those in August. Wouldn't necessarily get too depressed about it yet, but good thing is some moisture building up off WA, but really not impacting us yet. And you can see those anomalies from Enzo still way up into the tropics. Heading now into spring, let's have a look at spring as a total. You can see generally not too bad. A patch of sort of dry here again, which I think is definitely reflective of the IOD staying even neutral, maybe even slipping, maybe into positive, maybe not. Definitely not necessarily. Although don't forget that JMA didn't actually have that sort of weather conditions returning until sort of late spring anyway. So um, staying pretty good for the coast, actually. In fact, the whole east coast is average, just slightly above average. Southeast Queensland and most Queensland coast is below average, which does indicate to me a lack of southwesterly trade winds, which is interesting in itself. That just means that it may not be as strong a highs, or they're a little bit further south, and we're getting these stream showers coming in from the southeast for us, which are not making it up into Queensland, which is good. And you can see some upper trough activity through WA, which is dragging some moisture with it too, which is helpful. All right, but generally speaking, at this stage, it looks pretty average, which is a massive contrast to what the Bureau is saying and what we saw last weekend in terms of outlook. Of course, this is one model, and it's a big asterisk next to it, and we will obviously will have the comparison and the rest of the models by 1st of August to make sure we always cover every side of the argument of the story. All right. And CFS's take on summer, it's pretty much consistent with what we saw I think last week, what we looked at, and it's going with the flavour still, which is pretty wet, except for the tropics. And I think that, again, is possibly reflective of that Enzo situation rapidly weakening from late spring. So, this doesn't mean it's going to be all of that time above average too. And I think this is very much indicative of that late surge of moisture with a weakening Enzo situation, which I flagged at the start. And given what we can see, it's basically nearly everywhere, which says moisture coming down from the tropics, which can only be associated with the monsoon. So, if I was going to put like a figure on it or a timeline on it, yeah, I would think that the monsoon may not hit Northern Australia until maybe mid-January. Definitely by Australia Day, I think they'll see one, which is then, and I think they may not get back up to average, which is indicative here, but they're not that much below average. You can see here, like only 30 to 50 mils below a total across the whole of summer for those northern areas, which is normally 1,600 mils. That's not going to make that much of a difference. 50 mils difference out of 1,600 mils isn't going to make that much difference, to be honest. In terms of, and you can see the positive anomalies extend pretty much almost up to Cairns. So like it's not all over red overnight. That to me definitely indicates probably a late blooming monsoon, but plenty of moisture and possibly a cyclone too from northwest WA coming across and dragging some cloud bands with it. Looking at just that whole picture, and for New South Wales and for us, probably a pretty aggressive onshore flow, which means warmer nights and cooler days. Looking at that, that's all I would see from that pattern. Not saying that's going to happen, but that's from this one model. That's what I would see happening. So interesting times. Okay, so we looked at that really now. So really what we're going to see, of course, then is we're going to see these lows, sort of highs push south. These generally sort of high pressure systems, and the key takeaways are sort of at this stage what the models are saying is a cool, wet, cooler end to winter. Asterisk next to that. I'd like to see what Copernicus says next week. No doubt it'll be hot. But we're seeing that pretty much at this stage there, which we're told it's going to be above average winter. So at this stage, that's been wrong. Um, you know, we'll see what it brings for us in terms of the end of winter. I think still we're looking at a sort of cooler, pretty humid into winter. Pretty still lots of cloud about onshore flows with those sort of moisture, bit of moisture, which is what we love to see. And really, you know, just what we've seen so far. And I think we'll start to see actually pretty towards mid to end of August, we'll probably start to see a bit more impacts from Enzo and that developing El Nino, especially what we just saw with CFS, which is, going back to really starting to peak here. Um, and rapidly deteriorate after that. So we can see it's not aggressively increasing, but it's been pretty steady. And then you can see pretty much kicks up from about very soon, and then towards that sort of end spring peak. And don't forget that there is a lag time too. So um, just because it peaks here, which is what's that between sort of October, sort of November, we can see it peaking around here. We won't see that lag effect come through to probably end of spring, early summer anyway. So pretty much lines up what we were thinking. Sort of hot, dry start to sort of summer, and then that sort of monsoonal burst towards the end of it. Especially since we see the SSTs as well breaking down. So all in all, that's probably about everything covered. We will go and grab some questions at this stage. I don't really have many WTFs this week, unless anybody's got one they can share in the comments for me with something they've seen in their travels across the place. Most sites have been pretty quiet in terms of a whole range of stuff, just because there's really been nothing pumping out where the people need to get clickbait for about the strong mega El Nino of the world end of the world's been done to death. And aside from the usual, like this storm's going to be strong type of stuff, I really haven't seen too much stuff that sort of give me too many guffaws this week. But if you do have some, just stick the link in the chat and we'll pull it up and have a look at it together. But otherwise, I'm going to go and say hello. It's let a chat and see what's going on with everybody, and go back and have a quick look at what people are saying. And so hello everybody. So let's go. Can't make it's mine. Totally agree. Yeah, Obbs Hill. Rachel saying that Obbs Hill's not far from her. She said, yeah, it definitely is UHI influence, especially on days where there's not a lot of wind to mix. So they do get sort of like in this thermal bubble. No doubt, my Obbs Hill temp today was completely 2 degrees overblown. And so that's the way it is. It was definitely cool on the coast. You got your sprays in. That is great to hear, Mr. Mayor, aka the Doctor of Lawns in the Camden and the Southwest Sydney area. So if you need your lawns medical opinion or advice, make sure you see Lawn Doctor at Camden. Sure, he will definitely help you out. It's going to be no spotting area at WSI, which is for those not in the game, I'm guessing is Western Sydney International Airport, whatever it is out there, that Badgerys Creek, which is pretty crappy actually. The spotting area is definitely part of the community, especially of the plane spotter community. I know that they need to get behind it. They need to raise their voices and contact the local members. And there's elections coming up in plenty of places. Um, uh, in only 18 months' time for most places. So flex your muscle now. A good concerted community campaign will always turn the political mindset around, political will, except when it comes for, of course, internet censure and all that sort of censoring of AI and all that stuff that they're talking about, which is just absolutely stupid. I cannot believe we're in such a backward country at the moment. But anyway, of course, protect people, absolutely. But, in the end, it's people's decision what they see online, aside from illegal stuff, of course, which is naughty, and that should always be blocked. But nearly every single AI does it anyway. Like if you even type in a subject these days, it's not even risque. If it's close to being risque, it'll tell you, sorry, I can't talk about that. That's naughty. Like I can remember once having to, for work, everybody knows about hump days. Hump days, obviously Wednesday or the middle of the working week. We were doing some jokes about hump day, and I was looking for jokes about camels, and I got told no uncertain terms by an AI that was racist and it was demeaning to and I'm like, what race is a camel? And obviously caught it out, and it was quite hilarious. So I don't understand why the government thinks that they need to censor AI when most AI companies already censor themselves quite significantly anyway. Um, uh, Rach said big dams like Burrinjuck and Blowing have now only now crept above the 40% capacity wave. Yeah, they do take a while to they fill up those ones, which is sort of more a reflection of what their wet season was. I thought they had a decent burst there at one stage, but it was quite dry in Townsville, I think, for a while too. Windermere is starting to drop as well. The team was pretty full. Yeah, we've been pretty good in Sydney with our water supplies. Let's hope that stays the same. Um, Blowing dam from the start of the mountains to blowing would be really. Let's hope they. That's another consequence, of course, downstream effects of having a terrible snow season. Of course, the water supply and there are those dams that depend upon those runoff from snow, especially west of the ranges when you start looking towards the back of Wagga and obviously Albury, Wodonga. That's the stuff. Sorry, not Wagga, but Albury, Wodonga, and all those downstream communities there in the Murray. They really depend upon great snow season to have those the outflows and the melt work its way through the systems, and of course end up in the Great Australian Bight in the Southern Ocean. Doesn't look like they're going to be able to count on that much this year. Um, Hello, Mr. Bradley. Lovely to see you. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining. Never too late. Mr. Preston, hello. Lovely to see you. Never ever too late to join. We're thankful that you did. Xander, 1927, lovely to see you too. Um, oh, okay. Let's have a look. That's a clickbait one. Great. Let's have a look. Um, I saw another clickbait that took an hour to make about how a positive Indian Ocean dipole is going to cause havoc with the super strong world ending in it. Oh, I think my brain, I think, did see that in passing as well, and I sort of laughed it off because that's even too ridiculous to show more than yeah, I think that might be, was that, from our friends that say they don't use AI but then use AI at sort of southeast Queensland and capital Queensland. I think that was them. I did see them say something about that, which I laughed about. Um, but if you do have a link for that, let me know again. Put it in the comments and we'll put it up and have a good chortle together. Um, but thank you for that, Xander. Yeah, I do remember the one. Yeah, I did that. Did slip my mind. The movie tonight, 7 Days, the Day After Tomorrow. I actually didn't mind that movie. Despite the science being, well, it wasn't really science. Let's be honest. It was science fiction, but I didn't mind it actually. I didn't mind that. I sort of like the exacerbate obviously the cooling effects of those sort of subsidence of polar air. But I mean that does sort of happen, but not in that dramatic sort of freeze somebody in the street sort of degree. But really, does tend to the science or the pseudoscience in A Day After Tomorrow really also is sort of how stratospheric warming events happen too. It does tend to displace the polar vortex, of course, and the polar vortex has that massive ball of incredibly cold air, and cold air is very good at sinking to the surface because it's obviously denser and heavier than obviously tropical air, of course, and it doesn't have that dramatic impact, but it does sort of have that impact when it does, especially in continental US and Canada, of course, because there's no uh, maritime effects to sort of moderate it. And so there's massive ball of cold air does then sit across the land and it causes the land to chill very quickly, of course. And when land takes a lot longer to warm up than sea does, that cold air tends to, the effects tend to linger. So, what they did was compress the whole season in a couple of days and Day After Tomorrow. But generally speaking, extrapolate that out across time, and that's sort of exactly what the polar vortex does when it does um, sink south in these events, but not as rapid. Um, a lot of people whinging about no snow up the resorts, then they've got some of the neighbours complaining about the queues at chairlifts. Like you can't, shock horror. You can't please anybody in terms of that stuff. It's either it's not snowing enough or it's snowing too much. Like I just stop baloney. It's like people say, oh, it's not raining, and as soon as it rains, it's like it's too. When's it going to stop raining? I'm like, geez, it's been raining for an hour. Did you not remember your whinge from yesterday? Um, Hoping for new storms over part of the Wedmere Basin. Yeah, I think this. I think, as I said last week, I really do think this. We're going to see a stormier spring than we normally see. La Ninas tend to be terrible for storms because they saturate the mid levels of the atmosphere too much, and you really want a decent dry. And you don't want too dry air, but you want a decent dry air because it does help with in terms of hail. It helps in terms of developing gusty sort of storms. It helps in a whole range of stuff. Lightning as well tends to love that sort of dry slot. It tends to spark them up a bit more. So um, let's cross our fingers we get to see that. El Nino, of course, on the other hand, is terrible for storms because it starves the surface of moisture. And of course, we need moisture to be lifted up and to be convected up, of course, to create the storm in the first place. So we can get that happy medium, and I think we will, because even though we get these dire predictions about this super mega death, El Nino of death happening, as I keep saying, the lag period is quite a period of time, and we're still really haven't seen a lot of it sort of push in yet. So that sort of initial sort of ebbing and flowing, like you see with the tide when it starts to come in, you see like a big wave maybe, and then it pulls back a little bit, and you see another big wave. I think we'll see, that El Nino announce its presence a bit like that. We'll see like a surge of sort of dry stuff, then a bit more moisture returns. But I think in those in between periods is when we should see some decent storm outbreaks. Fingers crossed. We'll see, I guess. But one thing, it's not going to be the end of the world. I can see that. Road to the airport, Elizabeth drives an actual joke as far as nice thing roads. I heard the road into the airport out there is interesting. Yeah, it's a Badger's Creek. I must have a look at it. And because they've connected the was it the M7.5 or something like that, or the M3.75 or whatever, something they're calling some ridiculous name. I want to actually, now I'm talking about the there must be M6 mustn't be far away, which is that southern extension from the airport through to almost near me. Mustn't be far from opening now. Was it at San Souci there it ends up, or was it a bit further to the north of that? But then they're going to start the southern part of that, which then goes around the back up through, is it under the Shire even, or through the Shire, and then coming back out to the back of Waterfall or somewhere around the Engadine stuff, which would be fantastic because that'll take that whole sort of bottleneck away. Um, uh, uh, um, the airport's awesome. Oh, yeah, any member of S3, and I'll give discount 10%. Oh, there you go. Anybody who's part of the Nerds family who gets 10% discount from the generous medical advice for your lawns and gardens and hedges and tidy up and rubbish removal. I must say all those things. I know that he does too. So don't think it's just about clipping your garden, your lawns. He does look. He will come out and also give your garden a little bit of extra TLC. And if you pay me a bit more, he may even wear his red budgie smugglers as well. Apparently, that's well known around the Camden area for. That's what they tell me. Like I'm just hearing. I just see what the chat says. Like I'm just relaying information. I don't know that personally. Um, the day after yesterday, that feels like everything. It feels like today actually. Like I think the day after tomorrow is tomorrow, which is the freaking Monday that we all hate. Um, Great me to chill out to. Yeah, it is. Can anyone give the like button on tickle away? That'd be awesome. Thank you. That's the clickbait. Let know how the link will work. Um, thank you, Zen. I don't think that. I think maybe YouTube might have taken the link away. Um, the M12. It's just what it's called. It's literally called the M12. What? Oh my God, what a joke. The M12. We'll be up to the M17.5 soon. Um, Seeing a sight. Oh, Barry, hello there. Lovely to see you. Didn't see you pop in. Hope you are well up there. No wine testing tonight, or the party you get invited. You have a great social life. You get invited to some great parties. I must get myself one of those lists one of these days if I was a social person. But shocker, I am not. Um, uh, I've been in sight saying 2027 is going to be. I saw that. Yeah, you did share that link to me. And it's the what is it um the strange site, weather site, or something like that. It's called. I can't remember off the time. My brain doesn't work, but I'm saying it's they were basing on the fact that you know looking at statistics, and they say that Australia's wetter years have always gone in the reverse. So when there's been something like an El Nino, for example, it's always had massive floods. I mean, and there's some statistical, you can draw some comparisons, you can draw an analysis conclusion out of that. But I mean, I will be very reluctant to say that that's going to happen this time around. Like obviously, statistics, what they say, lies, damn lies, and statistics. So I mean, and statistics are often very rarely predictive. They're more reactive, let's be honest, especially when it comes in terms of weather, because how many oftentimes we've seen, you know, the greatest on record or the strongest on record or blah, 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 it might be, or, in the history of the earth, we've never seen the sun go this, this angle, which is absolute, how would you know? But, um, so yeah, I take that with a grain of salt. I guess if it happens, good on them. They've called it this early, but yeah, I'm not sure. Um, the thing is that El Ninos are very good at is starving the atmosphere of moisture, and I find anybody who says they're going to be massive floods in 2027 conditional with an asterisk next to it. But we've just seen, and it's still on screen before that, and we'll take it back to it, obviously, um, that this is going to die a lot quicker than the Bureau are even telling us. And we can see it rapidly weakening. So, you know, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. So if the atmosphere has been starved by moisture for a period of time here, it'd be like breaking the damn wall and the moisture does serve in, like it could well happen in, April, March, April. We could see one of those March, Aprils that we've all seen and lived and heard about, where it just doesn't stop raining. I remember as a kid, was it the 80s? After it was 83, like a really really horrendous El Nino, if I remember. And then not long after that, it was pretty significant rains, if I remember. I mean, it's not hard to go and look back at some of this stuff and draw some very limp-wristed and weak conclusions, which do have some fact to it. But if it's going to be like the greatest floods that Australia's ever seen, I'm not. I would treat that with great skepticism. But it wouldn't surprise me if there was a bit of a wet flurry in sort of March, April. Let's pin that one on the notice board and see how we go. All right, let's go and let everybody go off to their evenings. We'll get back to a few more questions, and then we'll say yabba dabba doo. Um, Mr. Wells obviously moderating himself, so I'm not sure what's happened there. He's obviously message redacted. Oh, sorry, it's just retracted. Message redacted sounds better. Maybe YouTube should do that. Um, the M6 is going south is finally happening again after they had the sinkholes. That's what it was. Thanks, Rach. I remember, like, because you drive past it if you go through, anytime you're going to go the back way between the airport and anywhere south, like San Susie and south, you can go through that sort of back part there, which goes through the construction zones, the M6, and they've had that sort of stuff there. And I was like, I wonder why it took them so long. I don't pay much attention to it, but I thought surely it's going to be open soon. But the sinkholes, well, it's a shock horror. They're going through like an area like just must be just pure sand underneath, like a Botany Bay. Is there any evidence of it? It's that stuff that builds up over thousands of years. That sand coming through and pushing up against the beaches there. So sinkholes would be interesting sort of scenario. Um, Driving through the M6, the next thing you know, you end up in China or something. Although I did work when I was saying that, I did work out that if you go through the center of, like, if you go through the country, where you don't go to China, because obviously that means you have to go upside down. Where was it again? You end up, I think it was it South America? I think you come out, or was it Africa? Anyway, if you drilled a hole basically from Australia right through the core to the other side, it comes out like Southern Africa or South America or something like that, if I remember. But I think it might be more South America than in Africa. Definitely not China, unless you're going sort of down and up north in your core. But if you go directly through, aside from melting to death and all the other stuff that will happen to you, and obviously passing and saying hello to Satan on the way through. Um, oh, Mr. Wells redacting his own message. He must be something. Is Mr. Well playing up to everybody? He seems to be redacting quite a few messages. He's going being very naughty, retracting himself. Have a meeting at WSI with SWN. Yeah, I mean, the thought has passed my mind. I guess the biggest thing that I've always resisted, because I've seen the politics of personality in all the other weather pages, whether it be Higgins, whether it be that Brisbane weather page, the laugh of all laughs. Most other pages, even Hunter, for example, is all built around sort of the owner. Everybody knows it. I just seen the politics of personality, and I guess I just wanted to avoid that with a barge pole, to be honest. I didn't want that to be about me. I wanted it to be about the people that form the Weather Nerds community, certainly Weather Nerds, to be honest. Which is why I sort of have resisted doing anything sort of in person. That and obviously so much going on in my household at the moment would be difficult anyway to do anything. But I've thought about it. I would actually love to meet everybody in person because generally I love everybody's interactions and I love the chats that we have and all the laughs we have and bits and pieces and the funny shit that we see. It's just about I don't know where the fine line for me is, to be honest. Without, I don't want to get into personality politics stuff. It definitely would be worthwhile. I definitely love to catch up, but I don't know. I got to work out in my head where that sort of fine line becomes. I just don't want to get into that in that cult thing like they've got in other weather pages where they go and then stalk other people's weather pages and they harass them, like your weather channel do. And shout out to your weather channel. You love your work, lol. I didn't see any retraction, mind you, about your prediction for an East Coast though this week. Must have missed it in the because I'm blocked. Um, yeah, I don't know. I've thought about it heaps of times, and it's definitely still on my list. To be honest, it's nothing I'm dismissing outright. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I've got to work my brain through it all. Definitely would be interesting. Um, Catch up everybody for sure. Your fingers are dyslexic tonight. That's pretty much my brain. M6 since you were a kid, yeah. Well, I mean, they've started. At least they've started. I guess it was better than having no M6. I mean, I can still remember a kid having the toll booths up at the top of the waterfall there. Um, that was hilarious. Paying for a road that the taxpayer already paid for. But anyway, they had the same mob that did this hydro snowy. Yeah, wow, it's they did a great job on that, didn't they? Um, there'll be an M9 from the M12 Huawei. Oh, okay, yeah, 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 interesting. All right, I am going to say that's pretty it. Everybody wants to go off to have their dinner. It's Sunday night. Everybody's done. Stay warm. It has been fantastic to have your presence and your company again for another Sunday night. I have to I got to try and find maybe a more broader WTAF for next week for sure. Because I actually quite do love, but I just couldn't really find one that wasn't major this week that was going to make anybody chortle. Don't want to do the same old El Nino or death over to pieces. Otherwise, lovely have your company. Take care of yourself. Stay warm. This week looks pretty fine. Ridge will take control, so it's going to be decent weather. Cold nights, although it might be moderated by a bit of cloud. We'll see just what hangs around. Next system's not looking till at least next weekend, and nothing at this stage strong. But fingers crossed, we'll see something towards winter. I'd love to see an ECL before winter rolls out. To be honest, been getting a bit of a withdrawal from that. At least something happening with the weather, other than these just onshore showers, which everybody gets bored of. But take care, stay kind to each other. Thank you for your company, and thank you, Mr. Well, again for being dyslexic and retracting yourself. But thank you also for helping out with the chat. And catch you later. Ciao.